I'd driven hours from the city, craving the solitude of the wilderness. My destination was a remote trail in the Olympic Peninsula, a place of dense forests and forgotten paths. The forecast had warned of fog, but I was prepared. Tent, supplies, and a stubborn need to escape the noise of life. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing nestled among towering cedars, their branches heavy with moss. As I set up camp, a light rain began, its patter a comforting hum against the canvas. But the fog rolled in faster than I expected, a thick rolling mist that swallowed the world, curling around the trees like living smoke. The fog was unlike any I'd seen, dense, almost tangible, pressing against my tent as if testing the edges. I lit a lantern, its warm glow struggling to pierce the haze, casting faint shadows that danced on the canvas. I tried to settle in, boiling water for tea, but the forest felt wrong. The usual sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of small creatures were absent, replaced by a silence so deep it seemed to hum in my ears. The rain continued, steady but distant, as if muffled by the fog's weight. As night fell, I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, the lantern's light a small comfort. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft and distinct, like voices carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the isolation playing tricks. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew clearer, forming words I couldn't quite grasp, like a conversation just beyond understanding. They seemed to come from all directions, weaving through the fog, now soft, now sharp, like a chorus of unseen watchers. I unzipped the tent, my breath catching as the cold mist brushed my face. I shone my flashlight into the fog, but its beam was swallowed, reflecting back as if hitting a wall. The whispers intensified, circling closer, and then I heard it. My name, spoken in a voice that wasn't human, low and raspy, like dry leaves scraping stone. My heart pounded, a cold sweat prickling my skin. I called out, demanding who was there, but the only answer was the rain's relentless patter and the whispers, now a cacophony, overlapping in a language I didn't know. I told myself it was the wind, the rain, my tired mind conjuring fears, but the fog seemed to pulse, its tendrils curling toward me, and the whispers grew urgent, almost pleading. I grabbed my knife, clutching it like a talisman, and scanned the clearing. For a moment the fog parted, revealing a silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, with eyes like twin sparks glowing in the dark. It stood motionless, just beyond the lantern's reach, its form blurring as the mist closed in again. I froze, my breath shallow, waiting for it to move, to speak, to do anything, but it only watched, its gaze a weight I could feel. Panic took over. I tore down my tent, the rain soaking my clothes, my hands shaking as I stuffed gear into my pack. The whispers followed, now a chorus of my name rising and falling like a chant. I stumbled towards my car, the fog so thick I could barely see the trail. Branches snagged at my jacket, roots tripped my feet, but I kept moving, driven by a primal need to escape. As I reached the car, the fog parted once more and I saw it again, that silhouette, closer now, its eyes glowing and fixed on me. It didn't pursue, it didn't speak, but its presence was a warning, a claim on the forest I'd intruded upon. I drove through the night, the rain washing the fog from my windshield, the whispers fading as though miles stretched between me and that clearing. By the time I reached the highway, my hands still trembled, and the silence of the car felt as heavy as the fog. I've never returned to that trail, but sometimes, when the rain falls at night, I hear those whispers in my dreams, calling me back to the mist. I was backpacking through a remote valley, far from any marked trail, seeking the kind of solitude only the wilderness can offer, you know? The Ozarks are wild, their hills and hollows steeped in stories of lost travellers and forgotten places. By late afternoon, I stumbled into a clearing, the ground carpeted with fallen leaves, and at its centre stood an old stone well. Its edges were moss-covered, crumbling, as if it hadn't been touched in centuries. The well's presence felt out of place, a relic in the forest that seemed to shun human marks. As rain began to fall, I pitched my tent nearby, the patter of drops on the canvas comforting counterpoint to the well's silent stare. I cooked dinner over a small fire, the rain keeping the flames low, and tried to ignore the well, but its darkness drew my eyes, a black circle that seemed to swallow the fading light. I told myself it was just an old water source, abandoned by some long-gone settler, but the air around it felt heavier, colder, as if it had held secrets the forest didn't want to share. As night fell, I crawled into my tent, the rain's steady drone lulling me towards sleep. At midnight, I woke to a sound, a low, rhythmic creaking, like a rope being pulled from the well's depths. My heart quickened. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent, the rain cold against my face as I stepped into the clearing. The well's mouth was a void, my flashlight's beam vanishing into its blackness. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate, accompanied by a faint splash, as if something heavy had dropped into the water below. I called out, asking if anyone was there, my voice trembling in the silence. No answer came, but the air grew colder, and a chill that seeped into my bones grew larger and larger. I leaned over the well's edge, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The air rising from the depths was frigid, carrying a faint murmur, like a voice trapped in the stone. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a low, mournful hum that made my skin crawl. I stepped back, my mind racing. Maybe an animal had fallen in, or the rain had loosened something inside. But then I heard it. A single word. My name. Echoing from the well in a voice that sounded like mine, but older. Broken, as if it had been waiting years to speak. It gripped me. I stumbled back to my tent. The creaking grew louder, faster, as if something was climbing the rope. The rain pounded harder, blurring the clearing, but the well's presence loomed, its darkness a weight I could feel. I sat frozen, clutching my knife, listening as the creaking became a scraping, like nails against stone. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as the air grew colder still. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, but the murmur from the well answered, mimicking my words in that broken voice. I don't know how long I sat there, the sounds growing closer, more insistent. The rain seemed to amplify them, each drop a beat in a rhythm I didn't understand. Then, abruptly, the creaking stopped. In its place came a silence so absolute it felt alive, pressing against me. I waited, barely breathing, until a new sound began, a slow, wet thud, like footsteps climbing from the well. I couldn't stay. I tore down my tent, the rain soaking my gear, and I ran, the clearing's darkness chasing me through the trees. As I fled, the murmur followed, but faint. Clear though, whispering my name in that broken voice. The rain stung my face, branches tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop until I reached my car, miles away. The well's voice faded, but its weight lingered, a shadow in my mind. I've never gone back, but sometimes, when the rain falls at night, I hear that creaking, feel that cold, and wonder what was climbing toward me. I'd hiked into the North Cascades for a solo camping trip, drawn to a secluded ravine where a crystal clear stream bubbled through mossy rocks. The forest was lush, its pines and ferns glowing under a light rain that fell as I arrived. I pitched my tent on a grassy bank, the stream song a soothing backdrop as I set up the camp. The rain was gentle, a soft curtain that made the world feel intimate, safe. I cooked dinner over a small fire, the warmth cutting through the evening chill, and felt at peace, far from the chaos of life. As twilight deepened, the air grew heavy, not from the rain though, but from a presence I couldn't name. The forest, so vibrant earlier, seemed to withdraw, its colours muted under the grey sky. I noticed it while washing my dishes in the stream, a shadow beneath the water, dark and human-shaped, moving against the current. I blinked, thinking it was a reflection or a trick of the fading light, but it lingered, swaying gently, as if alive. My flashlight revealed nothing but clear water, yet the shadow remained, its edges sharpening as if rising toward the surface. My heart quickened. I backed away, the rain cold against my skin, but the shadow followed, gliding along the stream's edge, silent but deliberate. I shouted, asking who or what it was, my voice swallowed by the forest silence. The rain's patter was the only reply, steady and unyielding. The shadow paused, its form clearer now, a figure tall and thin, with no face, just a void where features should be. It didn't move, but I felt its attention, a weight that pressed against my chest. I retreated to my tent, my pulse racing, and zipped myself inside, clutching my knife. The shadow's presence lingered, a cold certainty that it was still out there, watching. The stream's song, once soothing, now felt mocking, its rhythm too perfect, too deliberate. I lay awake, listening as the rain intensified, its roar blending with a new sound, a faint ripple, like something wading through the water. I told myself it was the current, debris caught in the stream, but the ripples grew closer, circling my tent. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as if drained. I peered through the tent's mesh window, but the rain and darkness hid everything except that shadow. It was there, just beyond the fire's dying glow, standing in the stream. Its form wavering like smoke, my breath caught. It didn't approach, it didn't speak, but its presence was a warning, a claim on the ravine I had intruded upon. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, but the stream answered, its ripples mimicking my words in a distorted echo. Dawn was hours away, but I couldn't stay. I packed up, the rain soaking my gear, my hands shaking as I dismantled the tent. The shadow watched, motionless, as I fled, the stream's song following me through the trees. Hiked out in the dark, slipping on wet roots, the ravine's weight pressing against me. Only when I reached my car miles away did the shadow's presence fade, the rain washing its echo from my mind. Can't face going back to that stream, but its shadow still haunts me. When the rain falls at night, I hear those ripples, feel that void staring from the water, and wonder what lingers in the depths, waiting for the next soul to stray too close. I'd found an old map in a thrift store, its faded lines tracing a trail to the high ridge in the Smokies, a place few hikers ventured. The promise of solitude drew me, and I set out with a pack and a plan to camp for the weekend. The trail was steep, winding through dense forests and pine and rhododendron, and by late afternoon I reached the ridge, a narrow spine of rock with views of endless peaks shrouded in gathering clouds. As rain began to fall, I found a shallow cave, its stone walls a shield against the drizzle. I set up my tent. Inside, the rain's soft hum a comfort as I brewed coffee over a camp stove. As dusk settled, the ridge grew unnaturally silent. No birds sang, no grasshoppers rattling their little legs in the grass, just the rain's steady patter and the occasional drip of water echoing in the cave. The silence felt heavy, like a presence watching from the shadows. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the cave's mouth, where the rain blurred the world into grey. The air grew colder, not from the weather, but from something deeper, as if the ridge itself was waking. At midnight, I heard a single footstep, heavy and deliberate, just outside the cave. My heart leapt. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam trembling as I shone it into the rain. Nothing, just the slick rock of the ridge stretching into the dark. Another step, then another, slow and methodical, circling the cave's entrance. I called out, my voice echoing off the stone, demanding who was there. No answer came, but the footsteps continued, their rhythm unbroken, like a predator pacing its prey. I retreated deeper into the cave, my back against the cold wall, clutching my knife. The footsteps grew closer, now accompanied by a faint scraping, like claws on rock. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as if drained by the ridge's darkness. I told myself it was an animal, a bear maybe, or a lost hiker, but the steps were too deliberate, too human, yet not human at all. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, but the ridge seemed to listen, its silence swallowing my words. Hours passed, the footsteps never faltering, circling endlessly. The rain intensified, its roar blending with the steps, creating a rhythm that pounded in my skull. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by the mountain itself, its stone and shadow judging my presence. My mind raced. Had I trespassed on some sacred ground, disturbing something ancient? The map had been old, its edges frayed, as if it carried secrets no one was meant to find. At dawn, the footsteps stopped, abrupt as they'd begun. The silence returned, heavier now, like a warning. I packed up quick, my hands shaking, and fled down the trail, the rain soaking my clothes. As I glanced back, the ridge loomed larger, its shadow stretching across the valley as if claiming me. I reached my car by midday, exhausted, but the ridge's weight followed me, a presence I couldn't shake. I've never returned to the trail, and I burned the map, its ashes scattering in the wind. But when the rain falls, I hear those footsteps, feel that silence, and wonder what walks the ridge, waiting for the next soul to stray too far. I was hiking in a high meadow in the Colorado Rockies, a place of wild flowers and jagged peaks, far from any known trailhead. The solitude was what I craved, a chance to escape the noise of life, to breathe the air untainted by the city. As a light rain began, I pitched my tent in the meadow's heart, surrounded by grasses that swayed like waves. The rain's whisper against the canvas was comforting, and I built my fire and settled in with a book, the world feeling right and perfect, as if I belonged there. As darkness fell, though, the meadow seemed to change. The rain's rhythm remained, but the air grew thick, the silence beneath it too deep. There was a stillness that chilled me to the core. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the tense walls, where the fire's shadows danced, a little too sharp, too alive. The meadow felt watchful, its beauty masking something older, hungrier. First I heard a rustle, like footsteps in the grass, just beyond the firelight. My heart raced. I called out thinking it was an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but the sound stopped, abrupt and deliberate. I shone my flashlight into the rain, its beam catching only swaying grasses, their tips silvered by the drizzle. The rustling returned. Closer. I shouted again, demanded to know who was there, but the meadow answered only with the silence and rain. I zipped myself into the tent, clutching my knife, my pulse racing. The rustling paused, then something brushed against the canvas. A slow drag, like fingers testing the fabric's strength. My breath caught. I waited, frozen, but the touch didn't return. Instead, the rustling resumed, now accompanied by a faint hum, like a voice too low to understand. I told myself it was the wind, the rain, my imagination running wild, but the meadow's silence mocked me, its stillness a lie. Hours passed, the rustling circling endlessly, sometimes near, sometimes far, but never stopping. The rain intensified, its roar blending with the hum, creating a rhythm that burrowed into my mind. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by the meadow itself, its grasses and stones judging my presence. My thoughts spiraled. Had I stumbled into a place that didn't want me? A sanctuary for something ancient? The fire died, its embers hissing in the rain, and the darkness pressed closer, heavy with intent. At dawn, the rustling stopped, abrupt as it began. The silence returned, but it felt different, like a predator retreating. I packed up, the rain soaking my gear as I dismantled the tent. The meadow was empty, its grasses swaying innocently, but I found no tracks, no sign of anything. Only a faint indentation near the tent, as if something heavy had stood there. I fled, the meadow's weight following me down the trail, its silence louder than the rain. I've never returned to that meadow, and I avoid the Rockies now. But when the rain falls, I hear the rustling, feel the brush against the canvas. I wonder what walked that meadow that night, unseen, but always present. I ventured into the high Alps seeking the solitude of untouched peaks, my backpack laden with supplies for a week-long trek. The journey began with a crisp morning, the air thin and sharp as I descended through rugged terrain where snow-dusted pines stood sentinel over narrow passes. The landscape was a tapestry of grey stone and green needles, the silence broken only by my boots crunching on gravel. As dusk approached, a light rain began, its cool touch a welcome relief against the day's exertion. I selected a sheltered ledge beneath an overhang, the rock face providing respite from the elements. I unpacked my lantern, its warm glow casting long shadows across the stone, and prepared a modest meal of dried fruit and nuts, the rain's rhythm a soothing companion as I ate. By nightfall, the ledge felt transformed. The rain's steady drone masked all other sounds, yet a peculiar tapping emerged, distinct from the droplets, a deliberate rhythm that quickened my pulse. I adjusted the lantern's flame, its light revealing only wet rock and swirling mist, the shadows dancing with each flicker. The tapping persisted, now accompanied by a soft luminescence flickering in the distance, greenish, ethereal, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp. Pulled into the darkness, my voice swallowed by the storm, but the light drew nearer, its glow intensifying with each step I hesitated to take. My mind raced with rational explanations. Perhaps a hiker's torch, refracted by the rain, but the isolation of the peak made such thoughts improbable. The tapping grew insistent, a metronome of the unknown, urging me to investigate. I ventured toward the source, my boots slipping on slick stone, the cold seeping through my gloves. The light resolved into a lantern, suspended in midair, its glass cracked and its flame an unnatural hue, casting a sickly green pallor. No hand held, yet it hovered, swaying as if guided by an unseen force. A chill enveloped me, deeper than the rain's chill, and a voice, hollow, echoing, whispered directions in a language I couldn't decipher. Its tones overlapping like a chorus lost to time. My mind raced with fear and curiosity. I considered turning back, but the lantern's movement was too purposeful, leading me along the ledge, toward a precipice I hadn't noticed before. The rain battered my face, blurring my vision, yet the lantern remained clear, a beacon of dread. I followed, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist, the rain soaking my clothes as the path narrowed to a razor's edge. The voice grew louder, a chorus of whispers urging me onward, their words unintelligible but their intent was very palpable. A push toward oblivion. The ledge ended at a chasm, its depths lost to shadow. The lantern hovering above the abyss, its light revealed jags in the rocks below, slick with rain. I froze, realizing the whispers intended my fall. Their songs, a siren's lure. Panic surged, my heart pounding against my ribs, and I retreated, stumbling over wet stone, the lantern's glow fading as I collapsed back at my camp. The tapping ceased, the whispers silenced, but the memory of that spectral guide lingers, a phantom etched into the alpine night. The following days were a blur of descent, my thoughts consumed by the encounter. I avoided the ledge on my return, choosing lower trails, yet the rain seemed to carry that green glow in its reflections. I've since started researching alpine folklore, finding tales of lost climbers guided to their doom by spectral lights, but no explanation satisfies. The experience altered my perception of solitude. Where once I sought it, now I dread it. The silence a canvas for that tapping to return. As I write this, the rain outside my window mirrors that night, and I wonder if the lantern awaits, its cracked glass a portal to another realm. A few years ago, I set out for a hike in the Black Hills, drawn to their rugged beauty and whispered legends of spirits bound to the land. My map led me to a remote valley, its pines gnarled and ancient, their roots twisting through the earth like veins. As rain began, I found a clearing dominated by a massive tree. Its trunk had been hollowed by time, its branches clawing at the sky. The tree felt alive and its presence was a weight in the air. But I was tired and the rain's patter convinced me to camp nearby. I pitched my tent under its shadow, and the forest's silence was a strange comfort. As night fell, the valley grew calm, the rain's rhythm the only sound. I built a small fire and its light was flickering against the tree's hollow, which seemed to pulse as if breathing. I told myself it was the fire's shadows, but the tree's presence grew heavier, its branches seeming to lean closer. I crawled into my tent, the rain's drone lulling me, but the sleep never happened. The forest felt awake. Its silence was cold. At midnight, I woke to a sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming inside the tree's hollow. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the rain cold. The tree loomed and its hollow a black void that swallowed the light. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, accompanied by a faint hum, like a voice trapped inside. I called out, but there was nothing, just the sound of the rain. I approached the tree, my flashlight in hand, and peered into the hollow. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and carried a scent of damp earth and decay. The tapping stopped, replaced by a whisper spoken in a voice like splintered wood, dry and ancient. I stumbled back, my mind was racing. Was it an animal? A trick of the wind? But the whisper came again, clearer now, joined by others, a chorus of voices weaving through the rain. I retreated to the tent, the tapping resuming, louder, more insistent, as if something was clawing its way out. The rain pounded harder, and its roar was creating a rhythm that burrowed into my skull deeper and deeper. I felt watched not by eyes but by the tree, its roots and branches alive with intent. My thoughts began to spiral. Had I disturbed a spirit, a guardian of the valley? The tree's hollow seemed to grow, its darkness spilling into the clearing. Hours passed. The tapping stopped. Then it started again, this time more frantic, sometimes near, sometimes far, but always there. My flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as the air grew colder. At dawn, the tapping ceased. The silence returned, heavy with warning. I packed up and left, the tree's shadows chasing me through the valley as I fled. As I glanced back, its branches seemed to move, reaching for the sky. I've never returned to the Black Hills, and I avoid old trees now. I hear that tapping sometimes, and feel that whisper inside my head, and wonder what lives in the hollow, waiting for another soul to linger too long. Appalachia. The mountains themselves feel haunted, don't they? I was hiking a little-known trail in the backwoods of Kentucky, looking for some truly isolated camping. I found it all right. Deep in a hollow, I stumbled across an old shack. It was falling apart, the wood rotting, the roof sagging, but there was smoke coming from the chimney. Someone was living there. I'm not usually one to intrude, but the thought of a warm meal and maybe some company was too tempting to pass up. I called out, but there was no answer. The door was slightly ajar, so I pushed it open. The inside was unsettling, to say the least. One room, lit by a single flickering lantern. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else. Something sickly sweet and metallic. In the corner, an old man sat in a rocking chair, his back to me. "Hello?" I said. He didn't move. I stepped closer. "Excuse me, sir? I'm a hiker. I got a little lost." He still didn't move. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and his head snapped up. His face, I can't even describe it. It was pale, almost translucent, with these huge black eyes that seemed to suck the light out of the room. And his mouth, it was stretched into this wide, unblinking grin, filled with teeth that looked too sharp, too predatory. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. He didn't say anything, but he started to rise from the chair. Slowly, deliberately, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The smell in the room intensified and I realized what it was. Blood. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was miles away. The image of that face burned into my mind. I never reported it. Something told me that this place wasn't on any map and it wasn't meant to be found. Sometimes I still see that face in my dreams, that silent, unblinking grin, and I can still smell the blood. The Sierra Nevadas in winter. Even the name whispers of isolation, doesn't it? I'd always been drawn to that kind of solitude, the kind you can only find miles away from any road. My plan was a week-long camping trek, solo, deep into the Ansel Adams wilderness. I was experienced, prepared, or so I thought. The first few days were breathtaking, in that serene, almost unsettling way. The snow was pristine, the silence profound. I'd set up my base camp near a cluster of whitebark pines, their pale trunks stark against the endless white. That's when I started hearing it. At first, I thought it was wind, a high-pitched, almost inaudible whine that seemed to weave between the trees. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, a whisper, just on the edge of hearing, like someone was trying to tell me something, but the words were too faint, too distorted. It started subtly, a fleeting sense of unease, the feeling of being watched, even though I knew there was nothing out here but trees and snow. But the whisper grew stronger, more insistent. I'd stop, turn, scan the silent forest, but there was never anything, just the endless white and the pale, watchful trees. One night, the whisper turned into a hum, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the trees themselves. I pressed my ear against the cold bark, trying to understand. And then I did. Not words, exactly, but images, flashes of something, twisted shapes in the snow, dark figures moving between the trees, a sense of overwhelming dread, of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond my perception. I tried to rationalize it. Altitude sickness? I am pretty high up here. Carbon monoxide from my stove? But I knew deep down that it was none of those things. The forest was alive, and it was trying to communicate with me, or maybe consume me. The last entry in my journal is a mess of frantic scribbles. I remember trying to pack up, to get out of there, but the trees, they were moving. Or maybe I was. The ground tilted, the whitebark pines seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal arms reaching for me. I don't know what happened after that. They found my camp empty. My gear was scattered. The only thing left was my journal, and the faint, lingering hum in the whitebark pines. Some of the rangers say they can still hear it, on quiet nights. They say it sounds like a voice, calling out into the endless white. The Pacific Northwest. The forests there are unlike any other place on Earth. Ancient, primeval. They whisper of a time before humans walked the Earth. I was backpacking through the Olympic National Park, drawn by the promise of towering trees and the misty atmosphere, and the sense of stepping back into a forgotten age. I got more than I bargained for. I got a glimpse of something that should have remained forgotten. It started with the fog. It's always foggy in the Pacific Northwest, a damp, clinging mist that shrouds the trees and dampens the silence. But this was different. This fog, it moved with a purpose, with an intelligence that defied explanation. Not like normal fog, drifting on the wind, swirling and dissipating with the changes in temperature, but like something more alive. It crawled along the ground, tendrils reaching out like grasping fingers, feeling its way through the tangled undergrowth, seeking something. I first noticed it at dusk. I was setting up camp near a creek. The sound of the rushing water a soothing counterpoint to the stillness of the forest. The trees were immense, their branches draped with moss like ancient beards, their silence heavy with secrets. And then the fog rolled in, not gradually, as it usually does, but with unnatural speed. a dense white shroud that swallowed the forest in minutes, obscuring the path, the trees, everything. But then I saw it move, a long sinuous arm of mist snaking across the clearing, undulating and flexing like a living thing. It was then that the unease began, cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. I told myself it was just the light playing tricks on me, the fading sun and the swirling mist creating illusions. I busied myself with setting up my tent, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. But as the night went on, the fog became more aggressive, more insistent. It pressed against my tent walls, the fabric bulging inwards as if something was trying to get in. I could hear it whispering outside, a chorus of voices just below the threshold of hearing, murmuring my name, calling me out into the darkness. I tried to ignore it, to bury myself in my sleeping bag, to tell myself it was just the wind, the sound of the trees, anything, but I knew what it was. The fog was alive, and it wanted something, or someone, and I was alone, surrounded by it, miles from any other human being. In the morning, the fog was gone, as if it had never been. The forest was still, silent, but different. The trees seemed closer somehow. The spaces between them diminished. The silence was heavy, oppressive, like a shroud, and I could see marks in the mud, strange dragging marks that looked like something had been pulled through the undergrowth, leaving a trail of disturbed earth and broken twigs. They weren't animal tracks. They were too deliberate, too purposeful. I packed up quickly, desperate to get out of there, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that place. But the fog came back, faster this time, swirling around me, disorienting me, cutting off my escape. It was like being inside a cloud, a cold, wet, suffocating cloud that pressed in from all sides. I could feel it on my skin, cold and damp, like a clammy hand, and the whispering voices were louder now, clearer, more insistent. I ran, blindly crashing through the trees, the fog pursuing me, a relentless white tide at my heels. I could hear it behind me, the whispering voices growing louder, closer, and the snapping of branches, the rustling of leaves as if something large and unseen was moving through the forest with me, and then I tripped. Fell hard, sprawling on the muddy ground, hitting my head on a gnarled knot. Pain shot through my skull, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, the fog was gone. I was lying in a clearing, surrounded by those strange marks in the mud, the trail leading away from me, back into the dense, silent forest, and I knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones that I hadn't escaped. I had just been released, for now, that the fog would be waiting, patient and hungry, for me to return. I was hiking in the Swiss Alps, a place of stark, unforgiving beauty, a place where the air is thin and the silence is absolute. I'd always been a climber, drawn to the challenge of the mountains, the sheer verticality, the feeling of being suspended between heaven and earth. But this trip changed me. It opened my ears to a sound that no human should ever hear, a sound that still haunts my dreams. It started with the music. I was high up, above the tree line, where the only sounds were the wind rustling through the passes and the crunch of my boots on the loose scree. The world was a symphony of rock and ice, a silent, majestic grandeur that filled me with awe. And then I heard it, a faint, ethereal melody, like a chorus of voices singing in the distance. It was beautiful, haunting, otherworldly, unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was as if the mountains themselves were singing, a chorus of ancient voices woven into the very fabric of the landscape. I stopped, mesmerized, listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. There were no other hikers, no villages nearby, no source for such music. The music seemed to come from the mountains themselves, from the towering peaks that surrounded me, their snow-capped summits gleaming in the thin, clear air. It filled the air, a siren song that resonated deep within my soul, stirring something primal and ancient within me. It was a call, a summons, and I felt an irresistible urge to follow it, to climb towards its source. I started climbing, abandoning my planned route, drawn by the music's irresistible pull. The higher I climbed, the louder the music became, and the more strange things I saw. The world around me seemed to shift and distort, the familiar laws of physics bending and breaking, shapes moving in the periphery of my vision, fleeting glimpses of movement in the corners of my eyes, shapes that didn't quite make sense, that defied the natural world. Rocks that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, their shadows lengthening and contorting in unnatural ways. A sense of wrongness, of reality itself unraveling around me, the world becoming fluid and malleable. The air grew thin, the cold biting, and the wind a howling gale that threatened to tear me from the mountainside, but I couldn't stop. The music consumed me, driving me upwards, towards its source, promising some kind of revelation, some ultimate truth. My body screamed with exhaustion, my muscles burning, my lungs gasping for air. But the song was too strong, too compelling. And then I saw it, a cave, high on the face of the mountain, a dark opening in the sheer rock face that pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light. The music poured out of it, a torrent of sound that washed over me, promising something beyond human comprehension, something both terrifying and sublime. I climbed towards the cave, my hands raw and bleeding, my body trembling with fatigue, my mind teetering on the edge of madness. As I reached the entrance, the music reached a crescendo, a moment of pure, transcendent beauty, a symphony of voices that seemed to tear the veil between worlds. And then it stopped. The silence was deafening, a sudden, absolute stillness that was more terrifying than any sound. The light in the cave vanished, plunging the opening into impenetrable darkness, and I was left there, clinging to the side of the mountain, the wind whipping around me, the cold seeping into my bones, the silence ringing in my ears. I never found the source of the music. I never knew what the cave held, what wonders or horrors lay within its depths, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to the core, that whatever it wasn't meant for human ears, and that part of me is still up there, lost in the music of the mountains, forever drawn to that haunting, unearthly song. I still hear it sometimes, in the dead of night, a faint, distant melody that reminds me of the things that lie hidden in the high places of the world. I've always been drawn to the dark places of the earth. Caves, mines, tunnels, places where the sun doesn't reach, where the silence is absolute and the world feels ancient and unknowable. So when I got a chance to volunteer to help map some abandoned mine tunnels in the Mojave Desert, I jumped at it. I figured it would be a break from the usual desert hiking, a chance to explore a different kind of wilderness. I was wrong. So wrong. I found a darkness down there that I will never escape. The tunnels were vast, a labyrinth of twisting passages and dead ends, a subterranean maze carved into the earth by men seeking fortune. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay was present, and the faint, acrid odour of something else. It was hot, claustrophobic, and utterly silent. A silence that pressed in on you, that made your ears ring and your heart pound. except for one thing: scratching. At first, I thought it was rats. Desert rats are big, and they can make a lot of noise. But the scratching was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like something much larger, something with claws, dragging them along the rock, leaving long, deep gouges in the stone. It was a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, a sound that spoke of something ancient and predatory. The scratching came from the darkness, from the unexplored parts of the tunnels, the places where my light couldn't quite reach. It followed me, always just out of sight, just out of reach. I'd shine my light down a passage, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, and the scratching would stop, only to start up again behind me, closer this time. It was like something was playing a game with me, toying with me in the suffocating blackness. I started seeing things in the shadows, fleeting glimpses of movement, shapes that didn't quite make sense, that didn't quite fit the geometry of the tunnels. I told myself it was just my imagination, my eyes playing tricks on me in the darkness, the dust motes dancing in my light. But I didn't believe it. There was something else down there with me, something that wasn't human, something that moved in the darkness with a chilling, unnatural grace. A few days went by and the scratching got closer, much, much closer. I could hear it right behind me, the sound of claws on stone echoing in the narrow passage, the scraping, tearing sound filling the tunnel with a horrifying resonance. I turned and my heart started to pound in my chest. My light was shaking, the beam dancing wildly across the rough-hewn walls, and then I saw them. Things. I don't really know what else to call them. They weren't human, but they weren't animals either. They were hunched over, pale, almost translucent, with long, spindly limbs that ended in wickedly sharp claws. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their bodies contorting in ways that defied the laws of physics, their claws scraping against the walls, leaving those long, deep gouges in the stone. They had large, glowing eyes that reflected my light with an eerie intensity, and their mouths were filled with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth. They didn't speak. They didn't make a sound except for that wet, clicking noise, a sound that made my blood run cold and my stomach churn. They reached for me, their claws outstretched, their glowing eyes burning into me, and I ran. I ran for hours, it seemed. Through the endless tunnels, the scratching and clicking echoing behind me, the sound of their pursuit driving me on. I ran until my legs burned. My legs screamed and my light began to flicker and die. I never found my way out. I'm still down here, somewhere, lost in the darkness with the things in the tunnels, and they're still scratching, still waiting. I can hear them now in the distance, their claws on the stone, their wet clicking sound. They're getting closer. I've always been fascinated by ancient places, the places where the veil between worlds seems thin, where the echoes of the past linger in the very stones themselves. That's why I was drawn to Scotland, to the remote moors and highlands where the ancient stone circles stand, silent witnesses to forgotten rituals and long-lost gods. There's a strange energy to those places, a sense of history and mystery that's both captivating and unsettling at the same time. I was backpacking through the northernmost reaches of the country, far from the tourist trails, seeking out the most isolated and forgotten circles. I found one that wasn't on any map, hidden deep in a vast, windswept moor, a place where the only sounds were the cries of the curfew and the whisper of the wind through the heather. It was larger than the others I'd seen, the stones taller, more imposing, their surfaces weathered and scarred by centuries of wind and rain. And then there was something else, something different about it. The stones vibrated, a low resonant vibration that I could feel in my bones, a deep guttural thrumming that resonated in my chest cavity. It was subtle at first, a barely audible tremor in the earth between my feet, but it grew stronger as I approached the center of the circle. I felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic attraction, an irresistible urge to enter the circle, to stand among the stones, to become part of their ancient song. As I stepped inside the circle, the humming intensified, filling the air with a palpable energy. The stones seemed to glow with a faint inner light, a soft luminescence that pulsed and throbbed with the rhythm of the earth. And then I saw them. Figures. They were translucent, shimmering like heat haze or ghosts, their forms indistinct and wavering. They moved slowly, deliberately around the circle, their movements fluid and graceful, their faces turned towards the center as if drawn by some unseen force. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't seem to even notice my presence. They were locked in some ancient ritual, repeating the same movements over and over again, their silent dance a timeless echo of a forgotten past. I tried to leave, to back away from the circle and escape the growing sense of unease that was creeping over me, but I couldn't. The stones held me there, the humming vibrating through me, through every cell of my body, making it impossible to move, to break free from their ancient spell. I was trapped, a silent observer of their timeless ceremony, a prisoner of their silent, hypnotic dance. The figures moved for hours, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to lose all meaning within the circle, the normal laws of physics suspended. The sun moved across the sky, but the light within the circle remained constant, that soft, pulsing glow emanating from the stones themselves. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The humming ceased, the vibration fading away until there was only the sound of the wind. The figures vanished, their translucent forms dissolving into the air. The stones went dark, their inner light extinguished, and I was free to leave, released from their ancient hold. I never went back to the stone circle. I don't know what I saw there, what ancient power I witnessed, what forgotten gods still danced within those stones. But I know that some places are not meant for human eyes, that some mysteries are best left undisturbed, and that the stones still hum, somewhere out there on that lonely moor, waiting for the next unwary traveller to stumble upon their secrets, to hear their song, to witness their dance, and I fear what will happen to the next person who is drawn in. I should have known better. I've always been drawn to the wild, the places where the trail fades and you're truly on your own. But there's a difference between seeking solitude and stumbling into something else. This was the latter. It started with the map. I'd found it tucked away in an old bookshop in Santa Fe, a hand-drawn thing on brittle parchment, supposedly charting a forgotten trail deep in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. No official name, just a series of symbols and a note. The way of the shifting stones. Tread carefully. The symbols were what drew me in, intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to writhe on the page. They resonated with something deep inside me, a primal curiosity I just couldn't ignore. I packed my gear, and a mix of excitement and trepidation filled me. The first day was uneventful. The trail, as far as I could discern it, wound through a landscape of stark beauty, red rock canyons, twisted juniper trees, the endless, unforgiving sky. But even then, there was an undercurrent of wrongness, an unnatural stillness to the air, a sense that the land itself was watching me. By the second day, the symbols from the map started appearing in the landscape, not carved, not placed, but formed. A spiral of stones at a trail junction, a pattern of cracks in a rock face, a cluster of oddly shaped cacti mirroring one of the map's designs. It was as if the land was responding to the map, or perhaps to something else entirely. That night, the dream started. Vivid, unsettling visions of the symbols twisting and turning, of the rocks themselves moving and rearranging themselves, of a presence, ancient and vast, slumbering beneath the earth. I woke up sweating and my heart pounding, the feeling of being watched intensifying tenfold. The third day is when things truly began to unravel. The trail became less of a path and more of a suggestion, the landscape morphing around me in subtle but disturbing ways. Canyons seemed to deepen, peaks seemed to shift as if the very geology was fluid, unstable. The symbols were everywhere now, impossible to ignore, guiding me, leading me deeper into the heart of whatever this place was. I started hearing things too. Not voices, not exactly, but a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the ground, resonating in my bones. It was a sound that just shouldn't exist. A sound that spoke of immense power and unfathomable age. And then there were the tracks. I found them on a patch of soft earth near the dry creek bed. They weren't animal tracks, they were way too large, too wrong. Three-toed with deep gouging marks that suggested something heavy, something immense, dragging itself across the land. And they were heading in the same direction I was. Fear, cold and sharp, began to gnaw at me. This wasn't solitude anymore. This was something else. Something I didn't understand. Something that felt profoundly and fundamentally hostile. I tried to turn back, but the landscape wouldn't let me. The canyons twisted, the paths diverged, and every turn led me deeper into the shifting, surreal terrain. The humming grew louder, the ground trembling with each pulse. The symbols on the rocks seemed to glow, but writhe within an inner light. And the tracks, they were fresher now. The earth still damp where whatever made them had passed. On the fourth day, I saw it. In a wide, open valley surrounded by towering, impossibly shaped rock formations was a structure. It wasn't a ruin, not exactly, but something grown. A massive formation of stone pulsating with the same inner light as the symbols. Its surface covered in the spiraling patterns. It was alive, I realized, or had been once, an ancient, petrified heart of the earth. And it was moving. Slowly, agonizingly, the stone structure shifted, its form undulating, the symbols on its surface glowing brighter, more intense. The ground around it cracked and groaned, and the air thick with the smell of ozone and something else. Something ancient and earthy, like the breath of a god. The tracks led directly to it. I knew with a certainty that transcended reason that this was the source of the humming, the destination of my journey. This was what had been calling me, drawing me in with its silent, irresistible power. I wanted to run, to flee this unholy place, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, drawn forward by a force stronger than my will. The stone structure pulsed, its light growing blindingly bright, and the humming reached a deafening crescendo. As I got closer, I could see details, grotesque carvings on the surface of the stone, depicting creatures that defied description, beings of immense size and terrifying power, and openings, deep, gaping maws in the structure's surface, lined with the teeth of rock. The structure was opening. A low, guttural growl emanated from the depths of the earth, a sound that shook the very foundations of the mountains. The ground beneath me heaved, and I knew, with a horrifying clarity, that I wasn't meant to witness this. This was a birthing, an awakening, something ancient and terrible rising from its slumber. The opening widened, revealing a darkness within that seemed to stretch into infinity, And then I saw it. An eye, huge, lidless, and glowing with the same malevolent light as the symbols. It fixed on me, and I knew in that instant that I was not a traveller but a sacrifice. The last thing I saw was the maw of the stone structure opening wide, wider than any earthly thing could, and the endless hungry darkness within. The humming became a roar, and then nothing. They never found my body, just my backpack, lying at the foot of a rock formation that wasn't on any map. The locals whisper about the shifting stones, a place where the land itself is alive, where the ancient gods still slumber beneath the surface, waiting to be reborn. They say the symbols call to those who are drawn to the wild, promising solitude but delivering something far more sinister. Should have listened to the warning on the map, should have treaded more carefully, but some paths are not meant to be taken. Some doors are not meant to be opened, and some things are just better left undisturbed. I'd always thought of cicadas as a nuisance, their incessant buzzing a soundtrack to sweltering summer days, but I never feared them. That was until I hiked the Lost Creek Trail in Oklahoma during the emergence. It was supposed to be a 3-day trek through a relatively easy if somewhat overgrown trail. I was looking for a relaxing trip, a chance to unwind and enjoy nature, but I got anything but. The first day was exactly as expected, hot, humid, and filled with the deafening roar of cicadas. They were everywhere, clinging to the trees, blanketing the undergrowth, their eyes red and gleaming. It was overwhelming, but I tried to ignore it. But on the second day, the cicadas changed. Their buzzing became more than just noise. It started to sound like words, like a language. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, frantic, and desperate. The cicadas themselves seemed different too. They were larger, their carapaces darker, and their eyes more intense. They moved with a strange purposefulness, swarming in coordinated patterns and buzzing around, and it was getting louder and more insistent. I started feeling ill, nauseous and dizzy with a splitting headache. The cicada song seemed to vibrate through me, resonating in my skull, making it hard to think. Felt like I was losing my grip on reality, my senses overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of their presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cicadas were everywhere, their bodies covering my tent and their buzzing a constant, maddening drone. I felt like I was trapped inside a living, breathing insect hive. And then I saw them, emerging from the ground. Not just the nymphs, shedding their exoskeletons, but something else. Larger, grotesque things, with elongated bodies, multiple limbs, and eyes that glowed with an eerie light. They were like cicadas, but twisted, corrupted, transformed into something monstrous. They moved with an unnatural speed, joining the swarms in the trees, their buzzing adding a new horrifying layer to the cacophony. I realized then what the cicadas were saying. It wasn't a language. It was a warning. They were calling to their kin, summoning them from the depths of the earth. And they were changing, becoming something else, something more. The ground began to tremble and I could feel a vibration in the air, a sense of immense power rising from below. The trees shook. The cicadas' song reached a fever pitch and I knew that whatever was happening, it was far beyond anything natural. I ran as fast as I could, the cicada swarm pursuing me and their buzzing a wave of sound that threatened to consume me. I didn't stop running until I was miles away from that lost creek. The sound of the cicadas fading behind me. But I never truly escaped the Cicada Haze. And the memory of their song, their transformation, the things that emerged from the earth, It's etched into my mind, and I know that somewhere in the heart of that forest the cicadas are still singing, still changing, waiting for the day they will rise.